The Blue Mountains bush is full of incredibly tiny flowers, some of them barely visible to the naked eye. Including this large tongue or duckbill orchid, which I had to mention because I love native orchids so much. When you're a writer, you really have to look closely at all the tiny details like these flowers. You have to think about what your character eats for breakfast, say, and whether they've run out of coffee. Plus, you have to think about the way you should be using punctuation. But you also have to look at bigger things like these giant trees. You have to think about your character's whole family background and motivation, as well as things like sentence structure and scenes. And finally, you have to look at the really big picture, like the whole world your character's walking around in, or the enveloping structure of the entire book. You have to have a God's eye view of things, as you do when you stand at Hargrave's Lookout near Blackheath. Hargrave's Lookout gives you a terrific view of the Megalong Valley to the east. You can look down and trace Megalong Road all the way along Pulpit Hill Creek, past farms and campgrounds to Old Ford Reserve. And this is a view of Megalong Valley looking west from the eastern side on a plateau now called Ngulla Bulgarabang. Following the same route, you can see Hargrave's Lookout from up here and the campground at Old Ford Reserve. But if you're a writer, you can't just look at this little world from a distance. You have to get in there, up close. You have to take the long and winding Megalong Road from the very top up at Blackheath and follow it all the way down into the valley through stands of temperate rainforest. Until you finally emerge into cleared land at the bottom of the escarpment. Up there is the plateau, Ngulla Bulgarabang. And these are the Megalong tea rooms, which are great but unfortunately shut at this point. And this is Little Megalong School. And this is Old Ford Reserve, which has a fabulous campground right beside a lovely big creek that runs into Cox's River. And because there's no loop, you then turn around and go back past the tea rooms and past Hargrave's Lookout and back up into the mountains. So when I write, that's my challenge, to keep the whole broad story in my head, but at the same time, focus in on the tiny details. So for instance, if I was writing a short story about an incident that happens at Wentworth Falls down the road, I would first of all give a broad description of the whole area, including, perhaps from a distance, sort of, not getting into their actual inner worlds, but I would give a description of the people in that broad area, which in this shot, they look like ants. And then I would start to focus in on the area. And finally, I would try and put myself in those people's shoes. For example, I would stand on the very edge of the waterfall, on the top of the waterfall. Of course, sometimes the world you're writing about is actually fictional. The whole world is fictional, which means you have to build it rather than observe it. And that's particularly the case with some of these books. Living Hell, that's a science fiction set in a spaceship that's going through space, and it runs through this like a kind of field of energy that turns the spaceship into a real living creature. So that's a whole world that I had to create. And The Future Trap, that's a world, it has been an ordinary day for Paula until she is kidnapped and transported to a space colony 5,000 years into the future. The space colony had to be built. And then The Paradise Trap is full of fake worlds, about a boy whose mother buys a magic caravan, and it has a basement, and each door in the basement leads to your dream holiday. So each dream holiday is a new world that I had to build. And Saving Thanehaven is actually set inside a computer. So it's a whole bunch of different computer games which I kind of had to build. So yeah, and when you do that, when you have to build the world, you're kind of behaving like someone who creates a botanic garden. You have to create, I suppose, microclimates or mini worlds. There's a botanical garden in the Blue Mountains at Mount Tomah, which is across the Gross Valley from where I live. It's a cool climate garden surrounded by rainforest, and it specialises in the kinds of plants that don't do well in Sydney. It also specialises in holding events, so it has lots of beautiful features and lots of stunning views. But most importantly, it's a scientific garden for raising specimens, so it also has a lot of microclimates. The formal garden is perhaps more cultural than scientific, harking back to European gardens of previous centuries with a lot of flowers and turnover, but it's still highly structured, like a Jane Austen novel. The rock garden is for alpine and other plants that like poor soils, strong winds and lots of light. You could write a thriller or an adventure novel set in this environment with themes revolving around deprivation and adversity. The bog garden is basically a hanging swamp, like the ones you find all over the Blue Mountains. But this one is full of carnivorous plants, pitcher plants and Venus flytraps mostly. If this was a book, it would be all about the perils of getting stuck, perhaps in a cloying or dangerous relationship. The wildflower meadow, well, you take one look at this and you're talking romance, or possibly a rom-com. It looks like a really nice set of sheets. The residence garden is a nice mixture of big and small, formal and casual. A bit of a comfort read if it was a book. There are also North American woodlands, which instantly made me think of Stephen King novels, and this garden, the Gondwana Walk. The Gondwana Walk is a carefully curated exploration of Gondwana land and the various continents that it once contained. It's also a prehistoric kind of garden that you'd want to visit if you were planning a fantasy book, like something by H.G. Wells. Needless to say, the star of the show is a stand of Wallamai pines. I saw some at the Lura Garden Festival, but these are more in their native habitat. They're the trees that existed during the Jurassic period and were thought to be extinct until 100 odd trees were found in a valley in 1994. And of course, building your own world to your own specifications, where everybody does exactly what you want them to do, there is no greater power on earth, which is probably why I do this. And also why, when I say happy world building, I really mean it, because there is no other way to be when you're world building. So happy world building.